All right, now we move to the next question. It's our fault. Can you address the assertion that it is our fault?
No, it's California's.
Lord Monkton.
Thank you. Well, is climate change our fault? Those of you who studied Latin will remember that this is a num question, a question expecting the answer no. Warming is not unprecedented, so we may not be its chief cause. For instance, between 1694 and 1733, most of you are too young to remember, at that time in central England, there was warming at a rate equivalent to 4.33 Celsius degrees per century. We have seen no such warming since then. It must have been all those Elizabethan SUVs, I suppose. And between 1979 and 2018, there's been warming at a terrifying 1.27 degrees per century, not the 3 degrees that governments have been working on as their mid-range estimate. And then they say there's a consensus, and they always speak like that, there's a consensus about global warming. Well, here's the answer. A paper was published by Cook et al., and Cook is a communist and is quite open about it. I saw him a couple of days ago, and he's still a communist, unfortunately. And this paper from the University of Queensland said that they had read 11,944 papers on climate and related topics in the journals of climate science and related subjects in the 21 years 1991 to 2011. And they had found that 97.1% of these 11,944 papers had said that global warming was chiefly caused by us. So I didn't trust communists, can't think why. So I got in touch with Cook and I said, I want to see your data file in which you have listed all these papers and how you marked them. And it took him 3 weeks to send it to me, 3 weeks during which he got massive worldwide publicity for this 97.1% consensus. So I got the data file and I wrote a computer program to read the whole thing down and count the number of papers that he and his team had said, out of those 11,944, had actually said that global warming of the last few decades was chiefly caused by us, or words to that effect. And the answer was that the people who had said there was a 97.1% consensus had themselves only marked 64 papers out of 11,944, which is, sir, what percentage? Quite right, 0.5% was trembling on your lips. 0.5% was the consensus they were in fact claiming on their own data file. We then read all 64 papers, only 41 of which said what they'd said. And therefore the actual consensus is 0.3%. So I told this to an eminent citizen of Queensland whom I knew, and he said, do me a witness statement, and I am going to the Queensland police. I'm really angry that a university in this state could publish something so outrageously at odds with what the researchers had themselves actually found and recorded. So he went to the police, and the Queensland police said this: yes, this was a deception. It was a deception which, in normal circumstances, we would treat as a fraud and we would prosecute. But because we cannot quantify how much Cook et al. Gained by writing this bogus paper, and because we cannot quantify how much loss has been caused to taxpayers worldwide by the large number of governments saying there's a 97% consensus about global warming, we are unable to prosecute, though we would like to. So now you know that the supposed consensus is based on a straightforward, I'm going to use the word, scientific fraud, and if the dreadful Cook, the communist, is watching this, then let him sue and see how far he gets in court, because I've got his data file. All I have to do is to show that to the jury, and he's nicked.
What's the question again?
It's our fault.
Of course it's our fault. Okay, so I wanted to say something about the way temperatures are shown. You know, you get these red bombs that go off. Let me see if I can remember how to... Okay, well, first of all, I guess I should address this first. Are rapidly decreasing climate-related deaths a sign of a climate emergency? We're going the opposite way, okay? The increase in world personal GDP going up, life expectancy going up, carbon emissions, you should see them going up, but look at prosperity versus the diminishing of major poverty. Look at all the food being grown. So I'm trying to figure out, well, what's the emergency? Things are getting better. And of course, that would be sort of an emergency because of the fact that the better they get, the happier people are. When people are happy, they're not disgruntled. They don't go out and riot or get dressed up in stuff that you can't tell who they are and bring clubs out and beat people with them, okay? Because if you're happy. But you were talking about the 97%. I'm going to show you what you could do with statistics. And I'm going to get back and use a wrestling example. I was 1-4 at Penn State. All right, 1-4, except I was 1-0 at 167. That's 1,000%. So theoretically, I have the best percentage of any Penn State 167-pounder that's ever been out there, even though there have been guys that have 148 wins, but they lost once, right? So you can manipulate that stuff. And I'll tell you what they manipulate all the time is first of all, how many meteorologists are in here? Dr. Ward's here, right? You guys know what saturation mixing ratios are, right? And you also know that very, 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 very tiny amounts of extra water vapor causes temperatures to react more where it's very cold, all right? So the bang for the buck of all this is up in the Arctic region. For instance, if you increase the amount of water vapor in the air by 1/10 of a gram per kilogram, it affects the temperature where it's -40 and pushes it up to -30. The warming is distorted. My professor at Penn State, Dr. John Kerr, said using temperature as a metric for climate is almost nonsense. Everything is water vapor and the relation water vapor has. Since water vapor is 95% of the greenhouse gases, guess who's in control? And I guess I have a slide a little bit later about that. But is it our fault? I mean, it's such a crazy question. Is it my fault that my son, who is a great golfer, hasn't won anything on the tour yet? After all, I was his dad. You can blame anybody for anything, all right? Of course, it all depends on what your idea is about advancing and progressive policies. I'm not talking about progressive, not flow, but progressive, the way the progressives have talked. Everything is upside down today and confused. I believe I'm a liberal, open-minded thinker. Was a John Kennedy Democrat, as Ronald Reagan was, and President Trump was a Democrat until 2009. But what happens is, and I'm all for all kinds of freedom, all right? The more freedom, the better. I personally believe that Dr. Will Happer, who is a premier nuclear physicist in this country, has it down right. And I don't believe Dr. Happer was a lifelong Republican, believe me. But he says that putting extra CO2 out there right now because the bands are saturated, it only absorbs back radiation at 13 to 17 microns, okay? It's already saturated. It's like putting extra coats of paint on the house and expecting the house to change a color. I use this example about a filament. You have a filament in a light bulb, right? I don't care how much electricity you put in, it's not going to get any brighter, right? So we're saturated right now. And what Dr. Happer is saying is we're in a CO2 drought. Maybe we're naturally coming out of it, and there is a beautiful synergism going on. Since animals exhale 100 times more CO2 than they inhale, right? And plants get that and grow like crazy, the Earth is greener than it ever has been in the satellite era, which is astounding that this is supposed to be a green movement, Green New Deal. Well, how much more of a deal do you get? And do you realize also, I read a paper a couple of weeks ago, I'm trying to figure out exactly if it's true. If you planted enough trees across the planet, the size of Canada, right? Someone said it'll cost $300 billion to do it. You would create enough greenery to wash out the extra CO2 if you're worried about that. So everybody is into CO2, and everybody's, actually, it's not humans that are now causing it, it's people that get up and have an open mind about things and try to say, well, why don't you look at this and that? I never ask anyone, I'm not going to ask anyone in here to believe me. I'm going to ask you, if it really is important to you, go look at why people are skeptical on it, all right? Go back and look at the past and ask yourself, why now and never before? That's why I asked, I did a movie with Bill Nye. I happen to like Bill Nye. A lot of people don't like him. I like him because I think he's done a great amount for science, and I'm not going to get mad at a person because where he is right now. But I said, Bill, there's no evidence in the ice cores of this. Where's the warming? It was much warmer before. We have, I'll end here quickly here. There's a glacier up in northwest Alaska that's retreating, all right? Now, if it's going to be our fault, how is it that as it retreats, there's a 1,000-year-old forest that's being revealed underneath it? How did that grow? So when you consider that it's all our fault, I think it goes back to the original statement by Mencken that there is a lot of things going on here that aren't about science and aren't about climate, all right? So anyway, that's all I have to say for now.
Croc TV.